Have you ever wondered when the screw-down crown was invented, or how watch shock protection systems evolved? Do you know about the migration away from self-luminous materials for watch dials and how they came back? Are you familiar with the 500-year saga of escapements and numerous design attempts to perfect this essential watch component? If any of these horological topics intrigue you, then you'll want to stay tuned as I present a history of watch advancements on this episode of Adventures with Time. I've been collecting watches for 4 years now. I've learned a little about watches and the history of telling time, but I thought now it was appropriate for me to fill in holes in my knowledge, and while I'm at it, share what I learned with you. Hello, I'm Bob, your guide to a look at the history and advancements made to watches over the years. On this channel, I chronicle my experiences in watch collecting. On this episode, I want to provide the history of telling time, but focus on watches and the many improvements made to them, specifically over the past few centuries. Advancements such as the balance springs, screw-down crowns, luminescence, and many more. If you're also interested in seeing reviews of specific watch models, I'll leave links at the end of this video so you can decide if you want to subscribe to my channel. I hope you do, and ring that bell icon so you're alerted whenever I publish new content. I, like many watch enthusiasts, was aware of specific watch features, but I never knew much about how they came into being. Preparing for this video was certainly an eye-opener for me. While I do cover a lot of material, including a complete list of watch innovations would make this video much longer than practical. My objective is to provide you with fundamental information such that you can continue your horological education on your own. I'll start out giving a brief history on how we measure the passing of time, followed by the early development of mechanical watches. Then I'll cover advancements in specific areas of watches. This is a long video. If you want to skip any part or go directly to a specific topic, there are time codes in the description, or simply use the video timeline here at the bottom of the screen. Let the learning begin. Let's start with the ancient means of recording the passage of time and determining the time of day. But first we need to understand where we came up with the concept of hours in a day and minutes and seconds. It began with the Sumerians, who adopted the sexagesimal system in the 3rd millennium BCE. The sexagesimal system is a means of counting using 60 as a base. Why 60? It is believed that the sexagesimal system was chosen because one can count to 60 using the fingers on your hands. Let me demonstrate this system. On one hand, you use the 3 segments of each finger, except the thumb, to count from 1 to 12. The thumb is used to point to each specific number as you count. Here we see the number 6 being illustrated. The 5 fingers on the other hand are used to indicate the number of 12 units you've already counted through. This is how you would represent the number 42. By using this method, you go beyond the limitations of counting to 10 using your fingers. You could now count to 60. Egyptians and Greeks adopted this system from the Sumerians and used it for several types of measurements, including time, degrees, and geographical coordinates, namely latitude and longitude. Hence, we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. But how did we get 24 hours in a day? The origins of the 24-hour day come from ancient Egypt, where daytime was divided into 10 one-hour intervals, with 2 intervals added at dawn and twilight. Similarly, nighttime was divided into another 12 one-hour intervals. Given the method of labeling time of day, what was needed was a method to actually track the passage of time. The first known mechanism was the use of water clocks. These devices were known as clepsydra, presumed to be the oldest time-measuring devices dating back to the 16th century BCE, used in Egypt, Babylon, and Persia. Some believe water clocks might have been used in China as early as 4000 BCE. By regulating the flow of water out of some container, one could determine the passage of time. You could also assign water levels to the actual time of day. Drawbacks to clepsydra stemmed from a need for a constant supply of water and the potential for the water to freeze, and of course the continued accuracy of the flow. Like clepsydra, hourglasses were used starting in the 16th century BCE. Rather than the flow of water, they used the flow of sand. Hourglasses, as the name suggests, could only determine the passage of a specific span of time, such as an hour. Some other means was needed to relate that to the time of day. A better system was invented by the Egyptians around 1500 BCE. These were shadow clocks, which utilized the sun's shadow cast by a fixed obelisk to determine the actual time of day, rather than monitoring just the passage of time. These were sundials. Sundials were a primary source of determining the time of day up through the 17th century. Sundials have their own set of limitations, namely needing sunshine to tell time. Hence, you couldn't use them on cloudy or rainy days or at night, although there are such things as moondials. In 520 CE, a reference to Chinese candle clocks was made in a poem by Yu Jiaju. By the regular reduction in the height of a candle, one could not only record the passage of time, but also specify the time of day. Candle clocks allowed one to tell the time, day or night, rain or shine. And so remained the science of telling time throughout the Dark Ages until the invention of the mechanical clock. The next era of determining time of day was the invention of mechanical clocks. What makes a mechanical clock different from the water clocks, candle clocks, and the other early means of measuring time? It is the use of a mechanism to provide a series of repeated equal oscillations to regulate the advancement of the time display. So we now move to the 13th century, when mechanical clocks were being installed in many churches and other religious buildings to inform people when it was time for prayer or service. The biggest obstacles to overcome to implement these early mechanical clocks was the ability to create those regulating oscillations and to store power to drive the clock. The early clocks stored power through either springs or weights. For both of these, the power source was a human who had to either raise the weight or wind the spring to create potential energy. Regulation was accomplished through balance wheels and foliats, or weights, which oscillated back and forth at regular intervals. Soon we'll discuss the use of pendulums and then springs for regulation. A third component in mechanical clocks is the ability to transfer the stored energy to power the oscillations, normally called ticks or beats. These components are called escapements. One of the earliest escapements was the Berg escapement. The first pocket watches were built in Germany in 1505 by Peter Henlein. A great advancement in clock accuracy came from Galileo Galilei, who determined that a pendulum would swing at a constant rate regardless of its length, and therefore could be used to regulate a clock. It was Christian Huygens who built the first clock in 1656 utilizing Galileo's pendulum escapement. While pendulums introduced increased accuracy, their disadvantage was that the pendulum needed to remain fixed and stable. This became an issue, especially for those at sea. Why? To determine one's longitude, day or night, that is, the position east or west, a ship needed to have an accurate clock set to their port of origin so that they can compare it to their calculated current time based on navigational measurements. But no clock worked reliably at sea. In 1714, Britain created the Longitude Prize for anyone who could solve the problem of telling time while in motion, primarily that problem for ships at sea. John Harrison won the prize after creating several prototypes of his clocks. His first clock, the H1, used two interconnected swinging balances. This was unaffected by the motion of a ship. Several improvements were made until the H4 in 1752 was put to the test, and he was awarded the winner after several years of testing. Harrison created his final clock, the H5, in 1772. The stage was now set for ever more advancements in clocks, pocket watches, and wristwatches. Improvements in accuracy, usability, and complications beyond time of day were developed between the second half of the 18th century and the watches of today. Now let's jump into specific areas of horology and discuss the advancements made over the past few centuries. I'll start with a group of watch features that, although introduced and progressed somewhat separately, they are usually associated with dive watches. That is, all of these features we are about to cover are necessary for divers' watches, but most have purpose for other types of watches. Dive watches, or do we call them diver watches, or the possessive divers' watches, are very popular. I don't think that's because there are a lot of divers in the watch enthusiast community. I believe, and this is purely conjecture on my part, there are two main factors for the popularity of dive watches. First, when wearing a dive watch, one can rest assured they won't ruin their watch if they get it wet or even go swimming with their watch on. And they look cool. By simply having a dive bezel, dive watches have an interesting look. Even though the bezel doesn't move on its own, just having it seems to give life to the watch. So what exactly is a dive watch? A non-watch enthusiast might believe that a dive watch is one that can withstand being put in water, but technically it goes well beyond that. In fact, there are several standards which specify requirements and test methods for divers' watches. ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, has published ISO 2281 in 1990, which covers basic water resistance of watches. Later, in 1996, they introduced ISO 6425, which covers the broader requirements for divers' watches. ISO 6425 contains information covered in other ISO standards, as well as the German industrial norm DIN 8310. This includes water resistance, visibility, shock resistance, and resistance to magnetism. I don't intend to provide a history of dive watches. One can find many articles, blogs, and other content about the history of dive watches. The way I'd like to address this area is to focus on the advancements in each of the features or aspects that go into enabling a watch to perform as a diver's watch. If you are interested in reading about the history of dive watches, or you want to get into more details surrounding the innovation of dive watches, I suggest the following two articles: The Evolution of the Waterproof Watch by David Bocher, and The History of Dive Watches by David Brendan. I'll leave links to both in the description of this video. Clearly, the first feature to address when considering a watch for divers is water resistance. One might think that water resistance concerns itself solely with keeping water from infiltrating the case. That's a good place to start, but it's much more than that, as you'll see in later sections. Water resistance is a term used to specify how much nominal water pressure to which a watch can be subjected and have it maintain function and accuracy. Notice we don't say waterproof. In fact, ISO 2281 prohibits the use of that term. Once watches became more mainstream in the 1800s, it was realized that dust and other foreign matter could make its way into the watch mechanism, which would harm the movement and degrade the oil. Even before we consider water as an issue, there was a need to protect a watch from the conditions of normal daily life. Possible sources of infiltration was points where various case sections met, openings for the crown stem, and time-setting pins. The lack of precise finishing made this only worse. Once watchmakers determined ways to improve water resistance, they would attribute ratings to their watches. Water resistance is determined by the pressure that a watch can withstand. This pressure rating is expressed in the number of atmospheres, as in 10 atm. Many times they use the water depth that produced such a pressure. For example, 10 atmospheres equals 100 meters of water depth. Also, fathoms are used. 1 fathom equals 6 feet. And it is important to understand that a watch's water resistance rating is based on static pressure. Once movement is introduced, the actual pressure on the watch is increased. During the latter half of the 19th century, several people started to work on means to increase the water resistance of watches. One of the first was A.L. Dennison, who in 1872 patented in the UK a watch case with a screw-down bezel. In 1879, Ezra Fitch patented a dust-proof case with a crown cap. 2 years later, he patented an improvement to the cap. The same year, in 1881, Almond Twigg patented his screw-down crown, but with a clutch to allow the crown to be unscrewed without engaging the crown system, similar to how today's screw-down crowns operate. The water-resistant innovations so far seem to have been designed for pocket watches. In 1891, Francois Bourgel patented a water-resisting watch case. A year later, this was patented in the U.S. The case design included a threaded screw solid case back, a movement holder adjustment such that it was held firm against the bezel and crystal, a spring seal for the handset push pin, and a screw-down crown stem tube. At the beginning of the 20th century, additional improvements in the water resistance of watches were made. In 1915, Paul Ernest Jacob and Auguste Tissot created the aquatic watch, which was made by the Fortis Watch Company of Switzerland. The case design removed the front bezel and employed gasket seals around the glass and crown stem where they meet the case. In 1917, Jacques de Polier and Son watchmakers developed a bayonet locking mechanism to hold the crown tight to the case to increase water resistance. In 1990, Frederick Gruen created a double case called the Hermetic. Essentially, the entire watch was enclosed within an outer case, hence limiting the points for water infiltration. Rolex released a similar design in 1922. In 1925, Paul Perregaux and George Perret patented a new screw-down crown. Rolex, under Hans Wilsdorf, bought the patent rights and made further improvements on the design, including moving the seal from the outside of the case to inside the crown tube. They also solved the problem that previous screw crowns had by having the crown only engage the stem once fully unscrewed. This meant the crown could be unscrewed even when the mainspring was fully wound. These improvements, along with a screw-down caseback and bezel, enabled Rolex to launch in 1926 the Rolex Oyster. This watch also had an automatic self-winding movement, but we'll discuss that in later sections. A different approach was taken by Cartier in 1932 when they designed a water-resistant watch for the Pasha of Marrakesh, where a screw cap was attached to the case by a chain. Also in 1932, Omega launched the Marine watch. This was a hermetically sealed case, somewhat like a double case. The inner and outer case each attached to half of the strap. Sliding the inner case into the outer case created a sealed compartment for the watch dial, movement, and crown. Omega followed on with several iterations of this watch, finally calling it the Marine Standard. During the 1940s, many of the original patents expired, allowing other watchmakers to use these designs in their own dive watches. Also, in 1943, Jacques Cousteau and Emile Gagin invented the Aqualung, which allowed divers to go to depths of 60 meters, driving the need for better dive watches. Panerai, who you will hear more about when we talk about Luminescence, created their crown guard system when designing a watch for the Italian Navy's Special Diving Forces. I couldn't find a picture of the first of these watches, but here is one of the early models. This brings us to what is considered the beginning of the era of modern dive watches. In 1953, Rolex brought out the Submariner, and Blancpain introduced the 50 Fathom, both iconic watches that remain popular in today's watch market. Blancpain is said to have introduced the 50 Fathoms a few months before the Submariner. But who really cares? Since then, watches with ever-increasing water resistance rating have become available. Watches that can go deeper than the average or even advanced divers will ever go. The growth of diving as a sport created the need for other diver-related advancements. We'll cover these next. There are two advancements which were specifically driven by the growth of the diving community. First of these came in 1953 with the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. The nageurs de combat, France's elite divers, needed a way to time their dives so that they did not run out of oxygen. Blancpain created a rotating bezel with a 60-minute scale. By aligning the beginning of the scale to the minute hand when they commenced their dive, the progression of the minute hand would track how long they've been diving. These bezels have a ratchet to restrict the bezel from rotating clockwise. Hence, the bezel could not be accidentally moved to indicate the dive had been shorter than it really was. Today, many watch enthusiasts, even those who are not into water sports, obsess about the action of the bezel, desiring secure movement with no backplay as the bezel is seated in position. Another watch feature that became a requirement as humans reached greater water depth came when diving vehicles used a mixture of oxygen and helium environments. This reduced the need for frequent decompressions. However, it created a risk for watches. Although dive watches at the time were resistant to infiltration of water and oxygen, helium, which is a much smaller molecule, could seep into the watch when they were in these mixed gas environments. When the divers did return to the surface, the helium expanded, increasing the pressure within the watch case and could blow out the watch. In the 1960s, both Rolex and Doxa tried to address this. Rolex in the Sea Dweller and Doxa in their Conquistador. Both claim to have the first watch equipped with a helium release valve. A spring-loaded one-way valve in the watch case allowed helium to escape as the pressure built. Doxa actually patented their design in 1969. Are you a lume junkie, aficionado? Do you at all care about the luminescence on a watch? Let's review the need for lume, short for luminescence, and its history on watches. Lume provides the ability to read a watch in low light conditions. Imagine you're a soldier at night trying to coordinate an attack with other troops and perhaps naval and air support. The attack is to start at a specific time, but how do you tell the time if you can't see your watch in the dark? Another use is the ability to read a watch while diving in deep water. You need to be able to time your dive to be safe, or you just want to see the time when you wake up at night. To tell the time in low light conditions, you certainly need to have the hands of your watch illuminated. Also, the hour indices are some part of the dial so you can determine its orientation. Dive watches may need to have the bezel scale illuminated. Other complications may be illuminated so they can be used in the dark or just for aesthetics. In 1945, the U.S. War Department issued TM 9-1575, which documented the specifications for the watches to be created for the Ordnance Department. In that document, they identified that luminous material should be applied to the hour numerals, hour, minute, and sweep second hands. But dial illumination was also a necessity in the First World War. Luminescence on watches began with the discovery of radium in 1898 by Marie and Pierre Curie. In 1914, watchmaker Panerai developed and patented a radium-based powder that they called radiomere, which could be used to paint watch dials. Self-illuminating paints based on radium were used on watch dials through the 1960s until it was banned on wristwatches in 1968. The story of the dangers of these radioactive materials was highlighted in books and film about a group of women employed in the 1920s to paint watch dials with radium. They were known as the Radium Girls. By self-illuminating, it means that these paints will glow without any external source of energy. Radium has a half-life of 1,602 years, by which time it has decayed 50%. So these paints remain dangerous for many years. Promethium is a lower energy element also used for self-illuminating paint until the 1960s. It has a half-life of just 2.6 years, yet still very dangerous to humans and doesn't shine as brightly. A third type of self-illuminating paint was used starting in the 1960s, made from tritium. Tritium has a half-life of 12.3 years, and its use as paint on dials ended in the 1990s. However, tritium continues today as a form of luminescence on watches, but in a much safer manner. Instead of being painted on the dial, the inner side of small tubes are painted with phosphorescent color, and the tubes are filled with tritium gas. The gas acts as a continual source of energy that causes the phosphorus paint to glow. Gaseous tritium light sources, known as GTLS, are used today in several watches, including in my Ball Trainmaster Standard Time 135th Anniversary watch. Most watches today, unlike the self-illuminating ones of yesteryear, use substances that need an external excitant to charge the photoluminescent material. In 1993, the Japanese company Nomoto developed Luminova, a photoluminescent paint that, after being charged by the sun, could illuminate a watch dial or any other component. Nomoto eventually turned into the Swiss company Luminova AG. Super Luminova is the registered name of Luminova, produced and distributed by the Swiss company RC Tritech AG. In addition to Super Luminova paint, RC Tritech produces Lumicast, which are precision 3D pieces made from Swiss Superluminova. There are various colors and intensities of Superluminova. C3 is the brightest and denoted as 100% brightness. BGW9 is less potent at 95%. Other colors and intensities exist down to a dark red color at just 18% the brightness of C3. Seiko licensed and rebranded Luminova as Lumibright. Similarly, Timex has Indiglow. Rolex's Chromolite is the licensed rebranding of Luminova using C9, which is 83% as bright as C3. Hopefully this has shed some light on the history of watch luminescence. Let's take a look at shock resistance. If you are a watch enthusiast and read through the specification details of watches, you probably noted that some list an anti-shock system. This is actually an attribute of the movement used in the watch. Although some specially designed watches have entire watch protection systems, as with the Weiler Code R chronograph I reviewed a couple of years ago. A more common application of anti-shock systems are utilized to protect the balance wheel system. This part of the movement is the most susceptible to shock, given it needs to swing freely and more specifically because of the delicate and very small arbor and is the axis on which the balance wheel pivots. No matter from what materials these tips are constructed, they could still break or bend when jarred. As with diver watches, there is a standard from the International Organization of Standardization for requirements and test methods for watch shock resistance. ISO 1413 specifically requires a watch to withstand a fall from 1 meter onto a wooden floor. Shock protection systems have been around since the 1700s. Most notably from the time Abraham Breguet invented the parachute shock protection system in which steel springs held the end stones and jewels in place. Modern versions of the parachute are still used today in Breguet watches. In 1933, Fritz Marti of the Swiss company Universal Escapements Limited invented an elastic bearing system. This design used a cone-shaped spring which made placement and removal from the movement much easier. Swiss patent number 168494 covers this design, which is known as the Incabloc shock protection system. In 1938, the design was improved by using a double cone system known as a lyre spring. This spring shape allows the balance assembly to move without impacting the workings of the balance. In 1981, Universal Escapements changed to Port Escape, which during the quartz crisis divested the Incabloc division. In 1988, a new company was formed to produce the shock protection systems for the mechanical watch industry. Since then, they have grown to become the most popular shock protection system in the industry. Today, the Incabloc system and most of the other systems on the market consist of a few parts: an escapement block, a chaton in which the bearing jewel sits, a cap jewel, and a spring. And there's oil between the two jewels to allow for smooth movement. The spring allows the balance shaft to push against the chaton, such that the spring absorbs the force to protect the delicate shaft. There's an animation on how this system works available on YouTube. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. Incabloc, which is not only the company name, but the trademark name of their product, also developed a lower cost, more competitive system called Nova Diac. As with any important system in the watch industry, several companies made alternative shock protection systems. However, as we said, virtually all have a similar design to that of the Incabloc. KIF Parachoke SA was formed in 1944 to produce shock absorbers. KIF produces several types of shock absorbers, including both removable and hinged systems. They use a differently shaped spring than what's in the Incabloc. KIF systems are said to be of higher quality than other systems, which may explain why they are used by several high-end watch brands including Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and others. KIF and Incabloc are the two major suppliers of watch shock absorbing systems, but systems are also made by other companies. ETA produces the Etishock system, Seiko makes their Diashock system, and Citizen makes the Parashock. In addition to Breguet, who uses their own parachute shock protection system, Rolex has developed their proprietary system called Paraflex. To close out this topic, I will briefly mention that several watch brands use different or even additional shock resistance systems. I mentioned the Weiler Code R watch. Richard Mille includes the Incabloc system, but they go much further by suspending the entire movement and dial from the case by arms and O-rings to cushion the entire mechanism. They also use titanium and other strong materials to protect the watch from damage. Magnetic fields are another source of trouble for watches. Although initially only a concern for those working in scientific or other environments where strong magnets are present, starting in the 1950s with the spread of everyday electronic devices and the recent wave of electronic personal devices, magnetic fields have become a concern for many watch manufacturers. Magnetic fields from both permanent magnets and devices which include electromagnets can negatively affect a watch's accuracy and even stop them from working at all. Components within the watches can become magnetized if they are exposed to magnetic fields. Most susceptible are the metallic springs in the movement's balance. These tightly wound thin metal coils, if magnetized, may cling to themselves, changing the oscillation of the balance wheel or completely stopping its movement. Magnetic resistance is usually expressed by the strength of the magnetic field which a watch can resist. The strength of a magnetic field is expressed as either amperes per meter, denoted in units of A per M, or as the flux density of the magnetic field, expressed as units of Gauss. 1 Gauss equals 79.77 amperes per meter. Sometimes when speaking about very strong magnetic fields, the unit used is a Tesla, which is 1,000 Gauss. To put this into everyday context, here is the magnetic strength of some items. Earth's magnetic field at the surface is 0.25 to 0.60 Gauss. A household appliance may create 20 Gauss. A standard refrigerator magnet produces 50 Gauss, similar to that of an iPhone 12 Pro. Moving way up the range, an MRI machine can produce from 3,000 to 13,000 Gauss. As with water and shock resistance, the International Organization of Standardization has published ISO document 764, which defines requirements and testing procedures for magnetic resistance of watches. To be ISO 764 compliant, a watch needs to withstand exposure to 4,800 amperes per meter, or about 60 Gauss, and maintain an accuracy of plus or minus 30 seconds a day as measured before the test. Other similar standards exist, including DIN 8309 and METAS N001. There are two methods that have been used to combat the effects on watches from magnetic fields. One can encapsulate the entire movement in a magnetically permeable metal that attracts the magnetic field and keeps it from impacting the movement. Soft iron is a material that keeps the magnetic fields from getting to the watch movement. Think of this as a shield. The problem with these shields are that the greater protection you need from magnetism, the thicker and heavier these encapsulating cases need to be. The more direct approach is to use what are called paramagnetic materials, which simply means they have a very weak attraction to magnets, and more importantly, do not retain any permanent magnetism once the magnetic force is removed. Over the years, several alloys have been used for watch components, especially the balance spring. One widely used material is Niverox, which is an alloy consisting of iron, nickel, chromium, titanium, and beryllium, first used for watch hairsprings in 1933. Other alloys you may see referenced in movement specifications are Invar, Lucidor, Linvar, and others. The first attempt to make a watch resistant to magnetic forces was in 1846 when Vacheron Constantin, one of the holy trinity of watch brands, started to experiment with a balance spring made from palladium. It wasn't until 1915 when they released the first pocket watch that had resistance to magnetic forces. The first wristwatch with anti-magnetic features is believed to be the Tissot Anti-Magneticue in 1930. It also used a balance spring made of palladium. You can see by the Tissot advertisements that everyday items which contain magnets were starting to appear in normal life. However, during the first half of the 20th century, anti-magnetic watches were of most interest to professionals who came in contact with strong magnetic fields. World War II expanded the need for magnetic resistance watches for pilots who had many electronic devices in their cockpit. Shortly after the war, JLC and IWC, upon request of the British Ministry of Defense, created the IWC Mark 11 watch. The movement in this watch was enclosed in a soft iron case. During the latter half of the 20th century, more watch brands included anti-magnetic features. In 1955, IWC came out with their Ingeneur watch, reference 666, that had a soft iron cage with anti-magnetic protection up to 80,000 amperes per meter, or about 1,000 Gauss. Later, in 1989, IWC created the Ingeneur reference 3508, which could withstand 500,000 amperes per meter, or 6,200 Gauss. This watch used components made from non-magnetic materials as discussed before. IWC used hairsprings made from niobium zirconium alloys, the same alloy used today in Rolex's blue Paratrom hairspring. Remember, these materials not only had to be resistant to magnetic forces, but also possess the appropriate elastic properties and to be tolerant of temperature changes. In 1956, Rolex launched the Milgauss, reference 6541, with, as the name suggests, a 1000 Gauss magnetic resistance. The Milgauss was based upon a request from CERN for their scientists who have to work near strong magnetic fields. It employed a soft iron shield to provide protection. The Milgauss is still a very popular watch from Rolex. A year later, in 1957, Omega launched the first Railmaster model, reference CK2914, with a specially made case and dust cover which would protect the movement from 1,000 Gauss, as with the IWC and Rolex models. In 2001, Ulysses Nardin launched the Freak watch. The Freak was the first production watch to use a silicon escapement wheel. It can withstand over 6,000 Gauss. Many watch manufacturers are now moving to movement parts made from silicon. Cartier is experimenting with hairsprings made from a glass ceramic composite called Zerodure. Zenith has worked with hairsprings made from carbon composites, and in 2013 the Omega Seamaster Aquaterra used silicon over a niobium zirconium alloy in its 8508 movement to create a watch that can withstand 15,000 Gauss. One should only expect that watchmakers are working on newer and better anti-magnetic components. A mechanical watch with a standard 4 Hz movement will make more than 20 billion ticks over a human's lifetime. That's a lot of movement and a lot of friction. What is to be done to minimize the wear on a watch and the effect of accuracy from this friction? Simple. Make the points of wear out of hard materials that can withstand the friction, and lubricate these points to reduce friction and drag. This brings us to watch jewels and oils. Jewels are small bits of material used to reduce and withstand points of wear in a watch, specifically in the movement. Originally, watches would state the number of jewels they contained, mostly as a marketing point, similar to how radios in the 1950s and 60s used to list the number of transistors. Nowadays, the number of jewels are noted on the watch movement. Jewels are used in watches everywhere there is movement between two components of the watch. Watch jewels are classified as the type of junction they protect. Pallet jewels are used where the pallet fork engages the teeth of the escapement wheel. Roller jewels are used where the pallet fork connects with the balance wheel roller to transform the circular motion of the balance wheel into a back and forth motion. Bearing jewels hold the metal spindle as it turns in a pivot hole. End stones or cap jewels are jewels that are placed on the tips of the balance shaft to hold the pivot in place. Originally, watch jewels were made out of actual gemstones like diamonds, sapphires, ruby, or garnet. In 1902, French chemist Auguste Verneuil invented a viable process to manufacture synthetic gemstones. This was a flame fusion process known today as the Verneuil process to make corundum as artificial rubies and sapphires. Synthetic jewels have some clear advantages over natural gemstones. They are less expensive to manufacture, they can be made with higher purity and under exacting tolerances, which is why synthetic jewels are used today. Jewels don't stop all friction issues for watches. That is why lubrication is also used to reduce friction on moving parts. There are many parts in a watch movement that should be oiled. The more complicated the watch, the more points to be oiled. And depending upon the part, different types of oils are recommended. Today, most watches use synthetic oils. However, during the early days of horology, many lubricants were tried and used to reduce friction in watches. In the early 19th century, olive oil was thought to be the only viable lubricant for watches. As described by Captain Caleb Cook, quote, watchmakers were then using olive oil as the only fitting oil for watches, but by experimenting with the porpoise jaw oil, they found it superior to olive or any other oil, end quote. This oil was shared in 1829 with New Bedford watchmaker Ezra Kelly. The Nye Lubricants Company explained that they capitalized on the work of Ezra Kelly, who discovered that oil from the jaw and head of the porpoise and blackfish proved superior to other known lubricant. Nye began selling his lubricant in 1844. Sperm whale oil was found to be the best of all these natural lubricants. However, all natural oils had their downsides. Over time, they would get thick and gummy, hence they needed frequent replacement. What was needed was a lubricant that didn't break down, wouldn't evaporate, would maintain the correct viscosity, and didn't hurt the underlying metals. After World War II, in the 1950s, the first synthetic oils came to market. One of the first, if not the first, synthetic watch oils was from Mobius in 1952. However, watchmakers didn't start to use them at first because it reduced their income from servicing watches. Synthetic oils had to be replaced less frequently. Today, there are several types of lubricants used depending upon the part requiring lubrication. The names of some of these are Mobius, Molykote, Kluber, Fixodrop, etc., Keystone, Nye, molybdenum disulfide, and others. Every watch needs a crystal, some transparent material that protects the watch face and underlying watch mechanisms, while allowing the dial to be easily read. Watches may have different needs or requirements for crystals depending on the type of watch and the wearing scenario. In general, watches need crystals to be transparent and clear and distortion-free, tough so that it will not scratch or break, easy to shape, and low cost. As with most aspects of early horology, crystals were made from available natural resources. In this case, crystals were made from mineral glass. Glass has been around for centuries and was made out of silica. These first glass crystals were untempered and could break or shatter if impacted. In the 1970s, tempering was introduced to hardened glass. Another improvement to mineral glass was to add aluminum oxide and boron oxide. This made the glass even harder and more resistant to scratching. Seiko refers to this compound as hardlex. In the 1930s, plastic glass, also known as acrylic glass, came onto the market for watch crystals. Although softer than mineral glass and therefore more easily scratched, acrylic crystals are the most affordable for watches. There are several varieties and brand names of these acrylic materials, including Hesalite, Perspex, Plexiglass, Lucite, and many others. At what is considered the top end of watch crystals are those made out of synthetic sapphire, just called sapphire crystals. The same Auguste Verniel, who created the synthetic jewels for watch movements in the 1930s, was able to make watch crystals out of mineral corundum. These synthetic sapphires are very pure and can be made into clear sheets for crystals. Although the most expensive of crystal materials, they are very hard, hence not easily scratched. However, they can chip or shatter, which is the reason why NASA doesn't use them for space missions. You don't want shards of material floating around in your space capsule. In addition to these three basic types of watch crystals, companies have tried other varieties over the years. Seiko's Saflex was a sapphire-coated mineral crystal. This isn't used much these days. A company by the name of Sterling made something called Cristerna crystal, which was said to be more shatter-resistant than sapphire. But for the most part, these three minerals are what's used today in the vast majority of watches. Before closing this topic, let me discuss a few additional features related to watch crystals. Many of you have encountered reflection for crystal under strong light, such that you cannot even read the time on the dial. Many watch crystals have an anti-reflective coating, known as an AR coating, applied during manufacturing to reduce reflection or glare. This is especially true with sapphire crystal, which, as you saw, are highly reflective. air coatings was first discovered in 1886 by Lord Rayleigh, who noticed that a tarnished glass surface transmitted through more light. It took until 1935 to perfect the creation and application of interference-based AR coating by Soviet scientist Alexander Smakula working for Carl Zeiss AG. Simply put, the AR coating is applied in a thickness such that it produces destructive interference. That is, the light rays reflected by the front and back of the coating interfere with each other such that they cancel out the reflection. Towards the end of World War II, pilot watches had AR coatings applied to reduce the amount of reflection from the bright sky when flying at high altitudes. Several materials are used for AR coatings, which are applied via physical vapor deposition, or PVD. Depending upon the coating material, the crystal will have a slight tint or halo at certain angles. Most common is a bluish halo. This coating can also slightly reduce transparency and appear dull. AR coatings can also scratch or peel off the crystal, which is why some crystals have AR coating applied only to the underside, which is protected from damage. However, to get the maximum AR protection, many crystals are coated on both sides and with several layers. In 1953, Rolex introduced their Datejust watch with a magnifier on top of their watch crystal directly over the date window to make it easier to read the date. The magnifier was dubbed the Cyclops. Originally made from plexiglass as a single molded crystal with Cyclops, the Rolex Cyclops is now made from sapphire that is glued onto the crystal and does come with anti-reflective coating. Of course, many other watch brands joined in started putting Cyclops on their watches that had date functions. Finally, I should mention something about display casebacks. Rather than having a solid metal caseback, some watches put a crystal in the back case so that one can enjoy the workings and finish of the movement. Because the caseback is somewhat protected by being against the skin, they do not have all of the same requirements as front crystals. Some watch brands, although using sapphire for the front crystal, use less expensive materials for the crystal on the display caseback. It has been suggested that the display caseback was initially used for watch salesmen's samples. This would allow them to show the details of the movement to prospective clients without removing the caseback. Following this, it appears that a limited number of wristwatches started to have display casebacks in the 1930s, which became more prominent in the 1940s. In this last section, I want to look at some of the advancements made to watch movements. This is a very broad category, some of which I've covered in previous sections, such as when we discussed joules and shock resistance or anti-magnetism. However, now I want to cover some of the major advancements made to the movement systems. Let's begin with power source. When discussing a watch's power source, I find it best to include the energy accumulator at the same time. For traditional mechanical watches, energy is stored in a barrel via a mainspring. Before the mainsprings were conceived, clocks used weights to power the mechanism. Humans would have to lift the weight to give it potential energy such that gravity could pull on the weight and provide power to the clock mechanism. The mainspring first appeared in the 15th century, making it possible for a portable and watch-sized clock. Energy to wind the spring is sourced from one of two places, a human or gravity. A manual watch is one where the mainspring is tightened by a human who rotates the watch crown, which in turn causes the mainspring to be tightened. One issue with mainsprings was that overwinding could put too much tension on the mainspring and cause damage. The slipping mainspring was patented by Adrien Philippe, one of the founders of Patek Philippe, in 1863. Rather than connecting the outer end of the mainspring directly to the barrel, it is linked through a circular expansion spring called a bridle. When the mainspring is fully wound, its force is stronger than the bridle spring, such that further winding will cause the bridle to slip, preventing additional tension on the mainspring. To reduce or totally eliminate the need for the owner to manually wind their watch, the automatic watch was conceived. An automatic watch uses a rotor which rotates due to gravity as the watch is worn and changes position relative to gravitational forces. The first automatic movement is believed to have been designed by Abraham Louis Parallel in 1776 or 1777. Hubert Sarton is credited with using a central rotor to wind the mainspring. Several other designs appeared over the following decades, but they were not used much until wristwatches came into existence. In 1924, John Harwood received a Swiss patent for a self-winding wristwatch using a center weight design. This design included a ratchet so that the mainspring would only wind when the rotor is swung in one direction. In 1931, Rolex improved upon Harwood's design by using a clutch to both limit the rotor's rotation to one direction and to prevent overwinding of the mainspring. This was called the perpetual system. Other designs for automatic winding have been seen over the years, including a Turner's ball bearing system and Boucher's weighted gear ring. Of course, there is more to a mainspring than just winding it. The force provided by a mainspring diminishes as the spring unwinds. This can impact the accuracy of a watch. The going barrel was invented in 1760 by Jean-Antoine Lepine and still used in modern watches. By using a longer spring and curving the inner and outer portions in opposite directions, the system provides virtual constant force until the spring is almost fully unwound. Today, there are several forms of mainsprings and several materials used to improve their performance. One of the most important components of a mechanical watch, and one that is challenging to design, is the escapement. The escapement interacts with the balance to both transfer its oscillations to the watch display and to deliver to the balance impulses of energy to maintain its actions. One might think of the escapement, along with the balance wheel and spring, as the brains of a watch. Everything else in the watch is either there to power the brain or to display information from the brain. Hence, one can understand why these components may have had a greater number of modifications and advancements than any other area of horology. As I mentioned in the earlier section on mechanical clocks, escapement started in the 13th century, with the Verg escapement believed to be one of the first and well before watches came into existence. Since then, watchmakers have been trying to improve the escapement. As stated in Hodinkie's article, The Modern Watch Escapement and How It Got That Way, the goals of creating the optimal escapement include impulse as close to the equilibrium point as possible in both directions, minimal friction and ideally no oil requirements, self-starting, good safety, and minimal interference with the natural motion of the balance. Between the late 16th century and the late 18th century, many escapement designs came to light, too many for me to review in detail or even completely list here. They include the cross-beat escapement Joost Berge in 1581 with two follets rotating in opposite direction, the cylinder escapement invented by Thomas Tompion in 1695, the Graham or deadbeat escapement in 1715, the pinwheel escapement in 1741, which used round pins instead of teeth, and there were many others. It was in 1755 when English horologist Thomas Mudge invented the lever escapement, which has, in some form or another, been used ever since. Basically, the lever escapement is parallel to the balance spring, allowing it to fit into wristwatches, and it allows the balance spring to swing freely, only making contact to provide impulse to keep the spring oscillating. There are many good detailed explanations of the lever escapement, so I will not try to replicate them here. Suffice it to say that the lever escapement has been a fundamental advancement in watch movements. Abraham Louis Breguet is a well-known name in horology, especially for his 1801 patented tourbillon. In 1789, he had visioned and created a natural escapement. The goal of a natural escapement is to reduce or eliminate the need for oil. The theory is that injecting impulse into the balance in both directions, rather than just one as in the lever escapement, friction is reduced. However, the design requires two escape wheels, and problems with the engineering and manufacturing of these wheels limited his natural escapement to only 20 pocket watches. But in 1974, the coaxial escapement was created by George Daniels and fulfilled the dream of a natural escapement to minimize or eliminate altogether the need for lubrication. To accomplish this, Daniels introduced a second escapement wheel to reduce friction. This design also provided a better method for injecting energy impulses to the oscillating balance spring. In 1999, after Daniels was finally awarded a patent, Omega started using the coaxial escapement in some of their watches. In the past 2 decades, still more improvements have been made. The dual direct escapement was used in the Ulysses Nardine Freak watch in 2001 and revised in 2005. The Freak was the first watch to incorporate silicon escapement wheels. The advantage of silicon is that it can be created with the precision required for the complex geometry of Breguet's vision. It used two symmetrical escapement wheels with a triangular lever. Other escapements have been introduced, including the Voltalainen double direct impulse escapement in 2011, the Laurent Ferrier natural escapement in 2011, F.P. Journe's biaxial high-performance escapement in 2012, Girard Perregaux constant escapement in 2013, and the Charles Fordsham double impulse chronometer launched in 2018. Today, many different watch materials are being tried in escapements and balance systems to reduce friction and achieve the precision engineering required. These materials include silicon, nickel phosphorus, diamond, and diamond on silicon. The question I have is if there is economic viability for further advancements to these escapements, but we'll keep an eye out for what is to come. Existing somewhat hand-in-hand with escapement is the balance system. The balance system is the regulation system for the watch. Its design must be in concert with the escapement. Hence, as advancements were made to the balance, it impacted the design of the escapement. As discussed in the earlier section on the origins of mechanical clocks, an important need was a mechanism to provide repeated, equal oscillations to regulate the advancements of the time display. And one advancement that enabled the development of watches is the balance wheel and spring. In the 14th century, and probably earlier, balance wheels were used with follets, which were weights that enabled the balance wheel to swing back and forth to provide timing oscillations. Later, pendulums were used in clocks to provide more accurate beats. However, pendulums have two problems. They were susceptible to vibrations and therefore not portable, and they could not be used in watches due to their size. It was in the latter half of the 17th century when the concept of using a balance spring was introduced. Christian Huygens was believed to have pioneered the balance spring in 1675. However, an interesting story in The True Origins of the Balance Spring by Rob Nuds indicates that it was actually Robert Hooke who first developed the concept of a balance spring 5 years before Huygens published his design. The balance is a wheel that rotates back and forth driven by a coiled spring known as a hairspring. It is these regular swings of the balance wheel that regulates the advancements of the time display. Since the balance wheel would ultimately slow to a halt, it is given a little impulse of energy from the escapement which keeps it in motion indefinitely. The initial issue with balance wheels and springs was the effect that temperature would have on the accuracy and consistency of the balance oscillations. I won't get into the scientific principles of physics and metallurgy, but suffice it to say that as temperature rises, the diameter of the balance wheel increases, slowing the wheel rotation. This increase in temperature also causes the balance spring to expand, making the spring stronger, which increases its effect on the rotation of the balance wheel. Many solutions were tried but not adopted until Pierre Leroy invented the compensation balance. His design was improved by John Arnold and Thomas Earnshaw, who in 1805 created a balance wheel where the outer rim was made of two metals sandwiched together, steel on the inside and brass on the outside. When warm, the metal would bend inwards, reducing the diameter of the wheel, thus bringing the masses attached to the rim towards the center. This counteracted the effects of the balance spring from the temperature rise. Another solution to temperature issues was to find materials which were unaffected by temperature. In 1896, Charles Edouard Guillaume found a nickel-steel alloy that had a very low temperature coefficient of expansion, meaning it minimized dimensional change due to temperature. He called this alloy Invar. A few years later, he discovered a nickel, iron, and chromium alloy he called Elinvar. This alloy not only had better temperature resistance, it was also non-magnetic. Modern balance wheels are made from glucodor, and hairsprings are made from Niverox. Both materials, which I mentioned before, were developed in the 1930s. These two alloys work together to minimize errors due to temperature changes. Most recently, in 2001, as discussed in the section on watch anti-magnetism, Ulysses Nardine launched the Freak watch, which uses silicon for its balance wheel and balance spring. I'll cover one last innovation to watches because most of us love hacking. Hacking refers to the ability to stop a watch movement so that multiple watches can be synchronized to the same time, down to the second. Hacking is implemented by having a lever lightly touch and stop the balance spring, thus stopping the movement from advancing. By the way, this illustrates one reason why an escapement needs to be self-starting. Hacking was seen in watches as early as the 1900s. Certainly military watches during World War II had hacking. I've not been able to determine if watches prior to World War II implemented this feature. If you know, please share. Some of you familiar with watches may know that even watches that don't have these hacking levers can essentially be hacked by something called back pressure. However, this can damage your watch, so I won't even talk about it here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.